Hello, everybody, and welcome to today's Progress Talks, Migrating to OpenEdge 12. My name is Susan Kudalakis, and I'm Marketing Manager here at Progress. Before we jump in, I wanted to introduce you to your host for today. Today's host is Tanya O'Connor. She's Director of Product Marketing for core products, including OpenEdge, Sitefinity, Data Direct, and more, with over 20 years of marketing, channel, and communication strategy experience in the software market. Tanya, thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Susan, and welcome today to the latest edition of Progress Talks, where you have the opportunity to hear live from the team that develops and supports OpenEdge. You may have joined us last month when we introduced our latest release, 12.2. Today, I have an elite panel who's here to join me to talk about their experiences in helping customers and partners migrate to 12x. They'll provide some best practices, some tips, and some things to consider as you develop your migration strategy plans. So let's get started. First, I have Shelley Chase, Software Fellow. Shelley has been with Progress for over 25 years, and she has a whole product view of OpenEdge. Her technical skills and customer-driven focus allow her to help to define the architectural direction and division for OpenEdge. Hi there, Shelley. How are you?
Hi, Tanya.
Next, we have Mike Fergal, who's the Director of Database Services. Mike started at Progress back in 1989 as part of the development team, and he's had a whole slew of different roles. What's really unique about Mike is he brings the experience of not only being a consumer, but a developer on OpenEdge. Hi, Mike.
Hi, Tanya.
Next, we have Dustin Grau, who is a principal software engineer. Dustin has worked with many customers on web-based solutions for over 20 years as a principal consultant. He also has vast experience going back all the way to version 10 and has particular expertise as it relates to web speed, Progress Application Server for OpenEdge, and the implementation of API solutions. Hi there, Dustin.
Hi, Tanya. Thank you.
And last but not least, we have Cameron Wright. Cameron also is a principal software engineer. He's an accomplished systems architect and a lead developer, and he has a strong affinity for technology and a keen business sense for emerging technologies. What's really unique about Cameron is he has a great way of being able to help companies understand the business value of these emerging technologies, what they bring in terms of differentiating your offerings, and how they help to increase customer retention. Welcome, Cameron.
Hey, good morning, Tanya.
Good morning. All right, so let's get started. Shelley, let's start with you. I know that you all have had experience in working with customers and partners as they've gone through their migrations, but Shelley, can you tell us what are some of the things that customers consider when they decide to make that leap forward?
Sure. So I believe many of our customers have come to realize that the applications they created 10 or 15 years ago need to be modernized. And often it's for tighter security or regulations that they see in their market, outdated user interfaces, or even integration with external business applications that have come into their company. OpenEdge 12 really focuses on the development and the deployment of these modern business applications, and we look at making them continuously available with a high level of security. So let's look at the key components that are part of OpenEdge 12. Pass for OpenEdge was introduced in release 11. However, there are some major advancements in the server for release 12. We have improved session management, scalability, troubleshooting, including a non-impact health monitoring, which you'll hear more about later in the presentation. PaaS-OE is also available for deployment as a Docker container in release 12, and that gives you true elastic scaling and load balancing capabilities, as well as blue-green deployments. The AVM has been enhanced to be more resilient to support database failovers and online schema changes without affecting connected clients. So along with that, performance improvements, which primarily focus on server-side joins, which reduces the amount of data that's sent back from the database server and puts all that complex analysis and querying on the database server rather than on the client. And finally, the database has undergone major performance improvements for client-server network connections. We believe for continuous availability, it's really important to use client-server network connections. And so we needed to make that more performant. There's a new multi-threaded database server, which allows multiple remote clients to access data concurrently. We've also improved the latching mechanism and the buffer pool hash table, which reduces contention, and along with the AVM has moved to command line parameters have all been moved as online operations. So when we did all of that, we compared, we did a test scenario where we looked at what would the gain look like for, again, for networked connections, right? So we weren't comparing against shared memory, we're comparing against network connections before release 12 or release 12.1. And we did some performance tests that were highlighted in a paper on progress.com. What we saw was about a 3% gain in the latching improvements, about a 35% gain with a multi-threaded database server, those concurrent requests, and a 43% gain with server-side joins. So the total was a 65% improvement over those client-server connections that we had before. And so that's pretty amazing statistics and reasons to come to OpenEdge 12.
It is. That is pretty amazing. Thank you, Shelley. But there are a lot of reasons why companies sort of halt their decision to move forward. Dustin, can you talk to us about when you're working with customers and partners, what are some of their concerns about migrating to 12?
Sure. So the first item is most customers usually have three constraints: time, resources, and of course, whatever their goals are. So moving to 12 does depend on how much you are looking to move or need to move. Do you need to move a lot of databases, migrate those forward? Do you have a lot of classic app server applications? That sort of thing. So to combat that, the first thing I always suggest is plan. So that is key to a successful migration, knowing exactly what your current architecture looks like and having an idea of what you intend for it to look like is a huge benefit, not just to your organization, but we're going to help you find the right tools and the right avenues to follow to get to those goals. It's also easier to draw parallels between your current architecture and the new server technologies. And that said, there are a lot of learning curves with PaaS. There's a lot more components involved. There's new ways to manage those server technologies. If you've not taken a look at the new Progress Information Hub, that has been redesigned and released, I think, just a few versions back, definitely with the 12.2. There was a new, I'm going to pull it up just so I can say the name of it correctly. There is a new section called Manage Progress Application Server PaaS for OpenEdge. And that is a great new resource that covers everything you need to know about the Progress Application Server architecture, how to create instances, how to deploy, how to manage, how to tune. So there's a lot of information in there. So that's usually the first step, is getting caught up on terminology, and that helps with the learning curve. As I said, knowing what the architecture should look like. Also, what other goals you want to look at. So if you need to satisfy other concerns when you migrate, such as maybe you weren't scalable before, you want to be scalable when you migrate, having that listed and having an idea of that you want to do that helps with your migration process, so you know what you need to look for in terms of building redundancy and resiliency. One customer specifically told us they wanted to get from 2 nines to 3 nines uptime. And we said that was great. So we were able to point them to specific product enhancements that would help them meet that goal. And then lastly, of course, the resources to solve the most pressing issues. That's Progress communities, our tech support team, and of course, professional services will be able to help you.
Okay, so understanding what your business goals are, having a good understanding of what your current architecture is and what's required to get to where you want to achieve eventually, and then also doing your homework, having a plan
Absolutely.
and making sure you understand the technologies that are involved. Great, that's great, thank you. So we're going to stop for just a second to take a quick poll. We want to get an understanding of what version of OpenEdge you're currently running and supporting, because it helps us in terms of supporting you. So Susan's going to go ahead and execute that. You'll see that on your screen in just a second. If you could just please take a moment to answer the question, and we'll see the results live. Okay. Okay, so it looks like vast majority of you are currently sitting on the 11 series. There's a percentage that has moved to 12 and equal percentage really that's sitting on 10. And then a couple of you maybe that are on older versions. So something to consider in terms of moving to 12. So Cameron, is this what you're seeing when you're talking to customers and partners? Are they typically coming from 11 or are they coming from earlier versions?
Yeah, Tanya, we're definitely seeing customers coming from all versions. Actually, we've had several that have been on 11 and have already begun the migration of their application from Classic to PaaS. As most of our customers know, Classic is no longer available in 12, so you have to begin to make that migration. We have seen several customers as well move from the 10 series all the way up to 12. Some have made the direct hop to 12, and some through database situations or platform situations have made just the gradual step from 10 to 11 and 11 to 12. So we've seen all kinds. There's no right or wrong. I guess Mike's really when you're migrating from the earlier versions, the things you have to take into consideration is your architecture, like Dustin said, and as well the database. The database, Progress is the strength of us is our database, and that needs to be upgraded. And so Mike's team, they're really the folks that have done a lot of that, and I'll let Mike talk to how that move happens.
Sure. What we've seen is there's been a lot of customers that are still legacy, still 10. I'm glad to see a lot of people are on 11 going to 12 that are attending this webinar, but we've seen a lot of customers still on version 9, believe it or not, in version 10. There's no reason for them not to move directly to 12. You do not need to make that version 11 stop. You can, however, because if you want to do it in 2 steps, move to PaaS OE first, and then move to 11. Move to 12 second. That's a path. Or you could do Big Bang. And we recently had a customer that just did the Big Bang, moving from 10 to 12, moving from Classic to PaaS, all in one go live, and it was very successful. It happened pretty quick.
And so, Mike, if you are migrating from versions 10 or earlier, is it better for you to simply migrate the databases from 11 to 12, or should you create a new database and can perform a dump and load?
It's always the magic question, isn't it? So the answer is it depends. What's your motivation? So a lot of people's motivation is, if we're going to do a upgrade, now's the time to do some deferred maintenance. Now's the time to move platforms. HPUX is going away. We see a lot of people moving HPUX to Linux. We see people moving Linux to Linux, replatforming their environment. We see people moving from Linux on-prem to Linux AWS, or Windows on-prem, Windows AWS. So a platform migration is a common theme when people are moving and upgrading their OpenEdge version. So that's one aspect. So if the platform forces you to dump and load, like an HPUX to Linux platform migration, then yeah, dump and load has to be part of your plan. Another opportunity, however, is if you've deferred this maintenance, let's take this in 2 steps. If you've never converted to type 2 storage, then this would be the time to convert to type 2 storage. However, I'm assuming that most people at this point have adopted the type 2 storage format since it was introduced in 10.0a a very long time ago. And that's what we see in the field. It's very rare at this point for us to see somebody that still has their entire database, or a database of large size that's still in type 1 storage format. So that's one question. If you're in type 1, take this opportunity to convert to type 2, and that's a dump and load. The second is now you're in type 2 storage. You don't need to dump and load to do the migration to 11 or to 12, I mean. But if you do, if you haven't done a dump and load in the last 3 to 5 years, even in type 2, that's the recommended time frame to do that maintenance. Just because you're in type 2 does not mean the need for dumping and loading goes away. Every application is different. Fragmentation happens within that application. You're never going to see physical fragmentation, but what you'll see is logical fragmentation. And that is you're walking the most used index, and those rows are not near each other when you're walking that index. And now's the time to do that dump and load based on that most used index and get those records in order on the index. So you'll see a dramatic performance improvement.
Okay, great. That's great advice, Mike, taking a lot of scenarios into consideration. So we're going to move on in topic to the classic app server migrating to Progress application server for OpenEdge. But again, we're going to take a quick poll. I just want to get an understanding of how many of you maybe have migrated already.
This is something I'm very interested in. So I'm looking forward to the results of this.
Yeah, as am I, Mike.
50%. Yeah, we have about 50% so far. If you all could just take a moment to vote.
Drum roll, please.
Okay, so the results are 78% have not yet migrated from Classic to App Server. So let's talk about that, maybe some of the reasons why and the benefits of doing so. So Dustin, with OpenEdge 12, it's no longer an option to utilize Classic App Server within the architecture. So can you give us some best practices in terms of making that move forward? So if you're going to migrate to 12, what should you consider in terms of migrating the app server?
All right. So first, I'm going to state that Classic App Server encapsulates, in my mind, both real app server connections and, of course, web speed. So I'm going to address both of those. The first one, web speed. So knowing exactly what you have, again, comes back to the planning and taking stock of your current architecture and application. If you have embedded speed script, that's going to move forward just fine. If you are still using the quite old mapped web objects, unfortunately, there's no path forward in web speed under PaaS. So that's kind of a hard stop. So you may have to re-architect that. If you have made customizations to webdist.p, I know plenty of customers have really gotten in there and customized that web speed server for their needs. Don't worry, those changes can be migrated forward. There's analogs within the web transport for you to do that. For the Classic App Server, for the most part, our code moves forward pretty much one-to-one. There's not a big surprise there. However, any clients that connected to the app server using the old host name and port, that's not entirely going to work. There's a new connect statement that uses a URL scheme because basically everything from PaaS-OE is exposed through Tomcat. So now all of your connections are going to be HTTP or HTTPS. So you need to plan accordingly with how your clients, application clients connect. And that also has an impact, I'll note, on your network infrastructure. We have had customers that now need to go back to their IT security group and say, okay, we need to open up different ports. Now we're using web traffic as opposed to a distinguished port for app server. So you need to get buy-in from other stakeholders in your organization. So again, planning and knowing what you've got. And of course, that long-term plan. Mike mentioned big bang. Some customers say, well, I just want to migrate my entire application, every business channel, everything at once. Think about whether you can do this in whole or as a piece. If there's one business channel that you think that you can physically isolate maybe, then start looking at moving that forward and just see how it goes from there.
Okay. So I'm also wondering, what's the path if you're moving from 12 from an older version when you're going to migrate your application server? Is it better in your mind to go from that version to 12 just in migrating the application? Is it better to do your migration to 12, or is it better to first do your migration from Classic to PaaS-OE? And actually, someone asked what PaaS-OE is. It's an acronym for Progress Application Server for OpenEdge. Just want to make sure everybody is aware of what we're talking about here. Is it better to do, just the full migration, would you say, Dustin, or is it better to first do your app server migration and then do your application migration?
It depends. I'll list two encounters that we had with customers. So customer A, they weren't quite ready to move to 12, just mainly due to staffing and other constraints. They just didn't have the resources to tackle that, but they knew they needed to move to PaaS when they do move to 12. So we work with them to outline and lay out their applications within the new PaaS technology. And so now they are successfully moved to PaaS. They're still running on version 11, but now they are fully ready to move to 12 when that time comes within their company roadmap. Customer B, completely different situation. They knew that they wanted to consolidate their databases. They had multiple regional databases. They want to go to multi-tenancy. So they knew they already had to do some sort of database conversion, consolidation. They didn't want to repeat those steps within 11 and then replay the same stuff for 12. So they said, you know what, let's just do the whole thing. So that's the big bang, as we call it. So they moved the database, they moved their application, and they upgraded to 12 and moved the server architecture all in one process. And so far they are in their staging environment now. They're working through laying out the roadmap for going to production at this point.
Can I chime in, put a vote here?
Matt, please.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Given a vote, for me, I would prefer people to move to 11, move to PaaS-OE first, get that stable. Then after that, move to 12, because the move to 12, especially 12.2, is much easier. And let me explain why. If you can do it in 2 stages, I understand it makes testing twice. You have to test to get to PaaS-OE and stage that and get that deployed. That's one piece of test. And then the next piece of testing is now I'm going to move from 11 to 12. It's another piece of testing. We see in the field many customers that have adopted OpenEdge replication as an example. Many large databases. Database sizes are no longer 10, 20, 30 gigabytes. They're more likely 100 gigabytes, 200 gigabytes, 500 gigabytes, and it's really not uncommon anymore to see databases over a terabyte. In our managed database program, where we're managing 2,000 databases, I can count probably 20 databases that are over a terabyte in that program. So with these large databases, like I talked before, dumping and loading might be an opportunity. You might have to do some heroics in order to get a dump and load done in the time frame you need. And our consulting services can help you do that. We have some tooling that can make that easier. But if you're staged in 11 and ready to go to 12, the migration to 12 is an easy conversion. And new in 12.2, that conversion can be done without having to rebaseline OpenEdge replication. It's logged, it's recoverable, so that way when you do the conversion, you don't need to turn off after imaging, you don't need to turn off OE replication. You can just do the conversion in your production, in your environment, the way it is.
Yeah, that's a good point, Mike. One of the other things you can do, that process takes some time. What we're seeing customers doing as well is, there's been this big theme of modernization and enhancing. And one of the things that PaaS gives us, as Dustin said, is that HTTP protocol. A lot more customers are moving to REST protocol. They're getting away from the traditional web pages themselves. So what many customers are doing is, because that database takes time to dump and load or whatever it does, they're taking a moment to reevaluate their DevOps and their CI/CD strategies, because they realize that in order to move and in order to test, like you just said, if let's say I'm on an earlier version of 10 and I'm going to move to 11 and make that hop to 11, I have to go through a full testing cycle. So what customers are starting to do is they're starting to evaluate their IAC strategies, their infrastructure as code, and they're starting to really look at their automated testing and adopting automated testing tools. Now, as all of us know, there is no automated testing for our GUI client. However, as you're moving forward and you're beginning to build REST endpoints and microservices, and you're making that migration, customers are making the investment to begin to add unit tests using ABL unit and JMeter and SOAP UI to really be able to rapidly move from different versions and to begin to build on that, and people always say, well, when's the best time to begin that? And the best time is now. And when you have that time in between upgrades, it allows you to have that little bit of thought, how am I going to do that? Can I build virtual machines? Should I be using infrastructure as code? This allows me then to take not only my source code, not only my my mocked data, but it also takes my my hardware, my physical hardware, virtualizes it, and allows me to push it out rapidly so I can build these images, test, break it down, and it allows that migration, that hop. And even if we have customers from 9 that are hopping up, it allows us to continue that hop much faster and much more rapidly, which is what we have to do to be in this rapidly evolving ecosystem that we're in.
So I want to take just a step back for a moment. I can see the questions that are coming in from the audience. And as we know, all companies are coming from different places in terms of their migration. And just fundamentally, not everybody completely understands the difference between Classic App Server for OpenEdge and the Progress Application Server for OpenEdge. So I don't know, Shelley, could you maybe just take a big giant step backwards and explain the fundamental differences from a technology perspective, and then also what the benefit might be in terms of moving to PaaS? Too big of a question?
Sorry, I was muted to try to not cause any disruption. No, it's a great question. So, the Classic App Server was written a long time ago, more than 15 years ago, and there wasn't a lot of standards available at that time. We used proprietary protocols, right? We did add REST to that. We did add SOAP. WebSpeed was a version of it. But you had different brokers that you needed to run for each of those. You couldn't have SOAP and REST on the same to the same backend business logic. So there was lots of limitations. It was very revolutionary in its time, but web technologies have really soared since then. And so we wanted to move to standards, get increased security, increased knowledge that our customers could get people who knew about technology such as Tomcat and Spring Security, and be able to leverage that. The other thing that we did at the same time, which is a big advantage, is we multi-threaded or provided multi-sessions. If I say threads, I'll get yelled at. We provide multi-sessions in the same ABL agent, the same AVM. So a single AVM can now manage multiple sessions concurrently, and that's a big boost as well. So it's really a different architecture. It's one of the things that it does serves the same purpose, but does it in a much more modern, much more effective way. And it also lets us do a lot of troubleshooting and monitoring that are standard, and that is easy to get to. We use certain technologies such as JMX to be able to query into the application server at runtime and see what's going on. You can make REST calls. So there's a big step forward in using PaaS for OpenEdge. And security, to me, is one of the biggest things I see people really embracing on, is that now they can use enterprise security that they may be using in the rest of their company and utilize it with OpenEdge technologies.
Right, obviously a major consideration. So a lot of the other questions that are coming through are about actual implementation. So Dustin, can you remind us again what that URL is, and we'll make sure that we send it out. That's on the Info Hub on OpenEdge. And also there are some papers that have been written that provide best practices in terms of migrating from Classic to the Progress Application Server. So we'll make sure that the audience completely has that too. Do you still have that available, Dustin? If not, we'll just make sure to
I
send that
do.
URL out.
I sent the. I will make sure that I have it pasted in the chat, which I think is only going to to our organizers. But yeah, we will make sure. I'll make sure that you get that link to hand
great.
out.
Yeah, thank you. Okay, so moving on, Shelley, you mentioned earlier that continuous availability is a major theme and a reason why customers are moving to 12. Can you tell us a little more about that?
Yeah, so earlier I talked about the different components and the improvements that we've made in Release 12. And along with that, we know that customers in their modernization efforts are looking for systems that are always available from a user's point of view, and also cost less to run. Right, and so that means different things to different companies. But in our migration efforts that we've done with companies, we see that there's some common proven architectures that we can recommend for both cloud native and on-premise deployments. So continuous availability really is two parts: high availability, which is making sure that you're available during planned maintenance, and then continuous operations, which makes sure that you're available during unplanned outages. And so for the planned outages or high availability, right, we have those online database operations, we have online schema changes, and we have the session management for PAS-OE servers, meaning that load balancing, meaning that the traffic, the clients coming in, can be routed to different servers. So even things for deploying new versions of your application, you can do by routing new traffic to different backend servers. For continuous operations, right, data place replication has been mentioned a lot during this talk. I think it's key, right, being able to have that database backup available, a hot standby, so that you're ready to switch over. We've done a lot in the client so that it can seamlessly move over to a replication target without interruption to the end user. And load balancing PAS-OE servers means that a server can go out and you can route traffic to the other PAS-OE servers or agents that are running.
Great. So obviously continuous ops, major consideration, business demand today, but not every company has that same level of demand. Mike, what are some of the other reasons why companies might consider moving to 12 that's not related to an always-on environment?
Yeah, I have to smile and laugh at this. I mean, I love the fact that we are doing all this fantastic stuff, but there are so many customers out there that look at this and say, that's great, don't need it, I'm not going to 12. The answer is you should be going to 12 regardless. And there's some driving reasons for going to 12, just like there's driving reasons to go to 11 and driving reasons to go to 10 back in the day. The big one is platform support. This is not sexy. This is not something people talk about, but I'll tell you what, tech support in consulting, and I'm in the consulting world now, this is probably, I talk about platform support probably more than I talk about anything else. What platforms are being retired by Microsoft? What platforms are being retired by Linux, by Red Hat? What platforms are being retired by AIX, Solaris, and HPUX, as we mentioned earlier, is going away. So there are drivers to get on later hardware. Later hardware does not support earlier versions of the operating system. Earlier versions of the operating system only support earlier versions of Progress. So that's probably the most predominant driver of people moving up that have no need for all these new features that we're putting into the product is the platform support. But as people move to 12, they get the benefit of all the performance improvements. We have seen very large deployments with multi-thousand users that really get stacked up on the BHT latch that we talked about. We made changes to the product to address that specifically, and if that's your bottleneck, you're going to see a huge performance improvement there. Shelley talked earlier about in the client server world seeing a 3% performance improvement, and that's true in client server, but if you're still in the self-service model and you're moving to 12 and that's your bottleneck, you'll see a X time improvement, not a percentage, but a 2 times, 3 times improvement if that tends to be your bottleneck. So there's those types of things that will help you. It's easy to maintain with the ability to change startup parameters online. Things that you may have a mistake on that you weren't thinking about. As a consultant and my team as a group of consultants, we come into environments and we say, if you just had this turned on, we could do more analysis, or it would help your improvement. In earlier versions, that requires a bounce of the server. In 12, it no longer requires a bounce of the server. We can increase table range size so we can see which tables are being used all the time, being hit all the time, without having to bounce the server in version 12. And then finally, like 10.2b, like 11.7, 12.2 is the long-term support release. This is the release that we expect the deployments to be on, to migrate to, and be able to be supported there for the foreseeable future, 5 to 8 years. Just like 11.7 is for the 11 family, and just like 10.2b is for the version 10 family.
Right. So there are many reasons to move forward. We're going to take another poll, and it seems like maybe some people were not seeing the first two questions, which is unfortunate. But the advice is to try to switch to a full screen, and this way you might be able to see the poll and the speaker simultaneously. So the next question is trying to get a gauge for those of you that are planning to move to 12. What is your time frame?
Another very interesting poll.
I can't take the suspense.
I'll give it a few more seconds. I keep seeing people voting, so I don't want to stop it.
I'll wait.
And not to influence too much, we do have customers beyond testing in version 12. They are in production, and it's stable. They're having no issues, and these are large deployments. While we're waiting, I'll tell you about one.
Yeah.
Technion moved from 10.2b to 12 just recently. They went live mid-April. 41 databases, platform migration from HP to Linux. They've been live for over a month and not one issue. So I know I'm kind of leading the witness here, but I'm hoping that's going to drive down the over a years down to the 4 to 6 monthers.
Yeah, and Mike, that's true. Dustin and we've assisted several customers migrating their application, and we've seen it move pretty quick. And as I say, in that time, they take the opportunity to get some automated testing in place and whatnot. So yeah, it moves pretty quick. It's not that bad.
Yeah,
I'm surprised Cameron didn't throw his phrase out there. We see a lot of customers that see this daunting task ahead of them. But Cameron's favorite phrase is, "How do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time." And sometimes
one bite at a time.
You just got to take it in small chunks and have those milestones, and you will get through the upgrade process and be like, okay, that wasn't so bad.
Yeah. Okay, the suspense is killing us.
All right, so the results are majority 41% in the 7 to 12 month time frame, so within this year. The next is 25% in 4 to 6 months. So I think that's great. Another 10 in the next 3 months, and then 24% over a year. So I think that's great, though. Shows a lot of progression.
It's respectable.
Absolutely, that's
right.
respectable.
So Cameron, Mike talked a lot about some advantages of moving to 12 that were, beyond the continuous operations, but there's also a lot of enhancements in terms of developer productivity. Can you give us a view of what you've seen customers really be able to leverage out of the 12 series?
Oh yeah, so we've done. Many of you are aware that the ProAnt is built into or is delivered with the install Gradle, where there's now a Gradle plugin that allows for automated builds using the Gradle plugin. I can compile code, I can package code. It allows for that CI/CD. There's also an internal effort and I'm not really sure if I'm supposed to use the name, but we have an internal effort going on to expand on the Latte plugin to do more that will begin to decouple some of the processes that take place inside of the developer studio that will allow us to do more from a command line, packaging, producing deployable packages for PaaS. We've made enhancements on that, which is excellent, which all revolves around this rapid deployment, rapid delivery. And so we've really made some great enhancements to that in thinking about those customers that are moving to that. And you know, like Mike said, you know, what one of the some customers are like, well, you know, that doesn't really sound like a lot, or it doesn't really sound like something that can benefit me. But if you've got a development team and you have one person spending at least an hour a day deploying code, or 3 or 4 hours a week deploying code, through automation and investing some time into that and getting it going, I've seen customers take a 4-hour delivery or a 4-hour build, installation, and delivery to a test environment down to about 23 minutes. And that allows you to more rapidly develop. It allows you to deliver code quicker. It allows you to see your results. And it gets you closer to that, to that agile methodology of being able to deliver features more rapidly. And so it's everybody wins when your customers are happy.
Mm-hmm. Yep, completely agree. So we're nearing the top of our time here. We have about another 12 minutes or so. So I thought it'd be great for me to start taking some more questions from the audience. Everyone feel comfortable with that?
Oh, yeah,
All right,
sure.
so let's start. We're just going to start from the top, dive on down. With schema changes, does a recompile need to happen after the online schema changes? So I'm not sure. Shelley, is this one maybe? No?
I'll
Who wants
take
to
that
jump
one.
in?
Yeah,
Okay,
Mike
go ahead, Mike.
I'll take that one. As with any schema change, it depends. That's the best thing I can say. If you're deleting a field, which I don't think you can do online yet, that would definitely take a recompile, because and probably a code change, because you might have code that references that field. But if you're adding a table, adding a field, or adding an index, the CRC does not change. So you do not need to recompile for pretty much any additions that happen to the schema.
Okay, great. Shelley, will support for JSDO continue in 12.2?
Yeah, so JSDO is definitely part of our integration story for app modernization and modern user interfaces. So yes, the JSDO is alive and well.
And actually, probably would help to explain what JSDO is for maybe those who don't know.
Sure. So JavaScript data object is something we created a few years ago. It makes the communication to an OpenEdge backend much simpler through to a PaaS or classic app server, so basically through REST. And it also provides a lot of client-side functionality as far as managing data sets, right? It provides a lot of the functionality of pro data sets that you have on the back end. We've provided that on the front end, which means you can do transactional commits, means you can handle multiple errors in a single, again, a single request. So it really adds that business capabilities to what a lot of the user interfaces provide you controls, and they provide you ways to talk to the back end, but they don't necessarily provide you ways to do transactional updates and processing. And the JSDO really makes that simple. You don't need the JSDO to do that and communicate with an OpenEdge backend, but a lot of people have found it very useful.
Okay, great. With that in mind, Shelley, once a business moves to 12.0, do we have any artifacts? I'm assuming what this means is maybe a paper or white paper or so that talks about moving to a more modern UI.
We're working on that, Tanya and I, as a matter of fact. So there, I don't think our story has changed much in that there are, for a modern UI is really web-based. Our Telerik Kendo UI components are really top-notch in that area, and they work with all different JavaScript frameworks like Angular and Vue and React. So a lot of our companies, a lot of our customers are using that. and we are we really embrace that. We have a modernization program within Progress Consulting for modernizing your UI, which is really helpful. And we also have some partner frameworks that are available that can help modernize UI. So there's really a lot of choices there.
And Shelley, would you say with modern UI technologies constantly changing and advancing, our goal really is just to make sure that we provide the fundamentals from the application perspective so that they can utilize whatever technology works best for their business, whether it be their strategy or whether it's just a technical, constraint that they have?
Yes, definitely. So we really know, right, the power of OpenEdge is really in the business logic and the database and all the transactional processing. And that's where we excel, and that's where we want to keep our focus, and with integration with all of these newer technologies. And, there's new communication protocols, there's new industrial IoT devices, right? All of those, integrating with all of those is really where we excel at, and really want to bring that together with all of our data, which is really central to what OpenEdge provides. And so with the UI technologies changing so much and so rapidly, we really felt that providing the right integration to a modern architecture is where we want to focus.
Great. So this is probably the question of the hour, Mike, and you alluded to this a little bit earlier. How long does an upgrade take?
My answer depends.
Depends.
A lot of this comes down to the testing. So here's I think demystifying what an upgrade will look like, I think helps. So typically in the consulting services, the way we do this is we'd go stage an environment, and we could have that environment staged pretty much in 2 to 3 days, maybe a week on the outside. So that's staged, it has your data the way it was, whether it's a dump and load or just a backup restore to move it to the new environment. It's staged, everything's running, provided that you are already at PAS-OE. If there's PAS-OE work to be done, that work needs to be done in that staged environment, get all that worked out, and then you start testing. Testing is up to you. If it's automated, great. If it's not automated, and I'm going to break this down into the two camps. We have the direct end user, and then we have the application partner. So let's talk the direct end user. Direct end user, we're going to stage the environment, help them, get them to get the code over there, compile the code, get them to test, get them to PAS-OE if needed, and then at that point they're testing. They should know the tricky parts of the testing and what needs to be tested, the most used part, the end of month processing, the end of year processing, things like that they can test on. During this testing cycle, we can easily bring the data over a second time, a third time, fourth time. And then at that point, you make a go live plan. We need some downtime. It's got to be approved by the business for that downtime. And then you go live. You've tested it enough that you feel confident that go live's not going to have any problems. And then the best thing to do after go live is to do a retune of the environment. Look at the new tunables available and make sure it's running well in that OpenEdge 12 deployment. So that's the direct end user. That can be anywhere between 2 weeks, I've seen it go that fast, to more likely 2-3 months, depending on how much work it is to get to PAS-OE and how much testing you need to do. And then when is that downtime opportunity? Sometimes you may be ready to go, but the downtime opportunity is not till July 4th in the US or till some holiday that allows you to have that downtime to do that final data migration. So that's the direct end user. The application partner, this should just be meat and potatoes to the application partner. They've upgraded from 9 to 10. They've upgraded 10 to 11. They've upgraded, this is just upgrade to 11 to 12. They have their processes. They know how to deploy their code. They know what needs to be tested to deploy the code. So if you're an end user of an application partner, you're really tied to that application partner adopting 12 and making it part of their latest release. So, I think that becomes just a conversation to have with your application partner, and the application partner, that's a conversation to have with us. We're certainly motivated and willing to help anybody, direct end user or application partner, make that move to get modern, to get on 12.
Yeah, Tanya, I'd like to add something to that. I'm sorry.
I'll add
No, you can
go.
Which is another factor in that is whether they're hosting the environment or not. So, you know, it's much easier to, we have some customers who are keeping their database on 11 and slowly migrating pieces over to 12 and the Progress App Server, keeping the database, you know, and kind of staging, right? So they don't have the big bang. They want to just stage and move applications one at a time. And that's another approach. And it's especially easy if they're hosting it, because then you're not impacting your customers, right? They don't really notice that behind the scenes you change releases and you may be using more modern, and then eventually you'll take advantage of all of the modernizations. And in this case, the last thing that we're migrating will be the database.
And just to be clear, when you say hosting, that means that they have a cloud-based application that the customers are connecting to the application partner's cloud. Application partner has complete control over the environment and what versions things are on and how to move.
Right. So that could be a private cloud or a public cloud or a hybrid cloud, or it doesn't, right? It's just that it's not physically at the customer's site.
Right.
Cameron, did you have something to add?
Yeah, I was going to say one other consideration that you know, we haven't really talked about is that migration to PaaS. So everybody asks about how long does it take, and you know, obviously you've got the database, and the database will run in its own channel, but then you have the migration from Classic to PaaS, and so some of the things that can take time, like Dustin mentioned, is web objects, mapped web objects don't come forward. So if you have 2 or 3 of those, then the re-engineering on those may be kind of quick. If you've got hundreds of them, then that may take some time. I would stress to all customers, analyze, see if you need it. If you've got 30 or 40 mapped web objects, but you're not using 20% of them, then now's a great time to throw them out. Or if you could say, you know, take 5 or 6 of them and be like, hey, you know what, if we modernize this and consolidate it into one screen, that would be a great time to do that. The other thing that Dustin and I have seen in several of our customer migrations, so the strength of PaaS is PaaS has flexibility. You're running in Tomcat, you've got all that Spring security, and it's, how do I say it, multi-session, because it's not multi-threaded, but it's
multi-session.
Multi-session.
Yeah, multi-session. Dustin and I have seen that, and I guess we say it as nicely as possible. If you've got some not so clean code, if you're not cleaning up objects, if you're not deleting buffer handles, if you're not emptying temp tables as you're passing them around, if you're not passing stuff by reference or binding, you're not cleaning up your class objects. In Classic, you know, and we'd seen this many times, especially from our time in consulting services, where people would, you know, they say, oh, well, don't worry, on Sundays we just shut web speed down because there's a memory leak, but we don't really worry about it because we just shut it down on Wednesday nights or Sunday nights and it all cleans it up. That is going to become very pervasive, and it's just going to become, you're going to have to fix those things. So depending on what level of garbage cleanup and how well you've done in managing your code will dictate how long this upgrade takes. So the database, Mike's team may be able to get the database moved over, like he says, in a couple of weeks, but it may take a couple of months to get your source code cleaned up. And while you're in there cleaning up your source code, you should, you know, obviously see if there's anything that can be refactored. So that's the other big factor. So you've got those 3 factors in how long is it going to take to upgrade. And I know everybody has perfect source code out there, but I just wanted to throw that.
And I think, Cameron, a good thing to add on that is, right, there's lots of different modes that they can run in PaaS for OE, right? And so they could start where you know, running sort of similar to what Classic App Server does in the single session, right? Especially if they're state managed, or and then can move their application over time, so it doesn't have to be made perfect, right, in that first go round. But certainly the evaluation, Dustin's plan,
yeah,
right, is
I was just going to say it's just like object-oriented development. You got to have a plan in place, or you're just going to make a mess of it. So make sure you've got a good plan.
And I just want to correct, it's not a couple of weeks to move the database, a couple of days to get the staged.
Oh, a couple days. Okay, sorry.
Don't want to scare anybody here.
And I'll
There's a
add one
Competition going soon.
I'll add one thing just to help demystify on when you're moving to PaaS, you're going to hear transports. If you're moving app server code, you pretty much go to the APSV app server transport. If you've had SOAP or WSA adapter in play, that is the SOAP transport. And if you want to put anything out on the web, even if you want to create RESTful endpoints, the cool new sexy stuff is going to be under the web transport. All of your old web speed code goes under there. You want to write your own, convert from a CGI wrapper program to what's called a web handler. All of that technology, you want to expose the data object services so that they work with the JSDO. Web, there's everything that you need is in web. That was added last, but it is absolutely the best part of PaaS.
So fundamental question here, can you run PaaS and Classic on the same server? If so, what are the catches? If not, why not?
If you're on
Dustin?
11, then you should be able to run on the same, because you have Classic and you might have to do a reinstall to add the components. So if you're like on a version of 11 that supports PaaS, and yeah, you would have to add those components to your DLC install. But yes, you could run them on the same. Otherwise, yeah, then you're talking about you got 11 and 12. Yeah.
Right. So I think you have to be careful also in that we did change the version of Java at 12.2. So the version of Tomcat is also upgraded to that. So what is supported by Classic is Java 8. So just some things to keep in mind when we say, yes, I'll take Mike's, it depends.
Yeah,
right. So I'm assuming you're talking about having Classic in a version 11 install on the same machine that 12 is installed on, where you're running PaaS, because obviously you cannot run Classic and PaaS in version 12 because Classic doesn't exist. So I'm assuming that's the case. And so yeah, there's going to be some things you need to make sure. 12, the Java version that is supported is no longer embedded. You have to go get that, so it's external. You got to make sure that it's pointing to the right Java version. That's a very common problem we see in the field. Where in the 11, it's probably embedded. And so you don't want to have the 12 version pointing to the 11 version because it's convenient, because it's going to be the wrong version.
So we have lots of questions. We unfortunately can't get to all these questions in our remaining 1 minute, so we will make sure that your account manager has this information and reaches out to you, and we'll also develop some content to answer these questions specifically. We have 1 more minute. Just wondering if anyone has any closing remarks that they'd like to share. And that's my alarm going off. Sorry.
I'd just say this, Tanya. I said if you got customers that are sitting on the fence as to whether they're gonna or whether they're not, get a plan together. Reach out to professional services. Reach out to Mike's group, the database group. Start getting a plan together, and at least. I know it may sound daunting, we've talked about Java 11 and all this and PaaS and no Classic and on, but it's not. It really is that elephant, and it really is just one bite at a time. And if you put a good plan together, migrations are quite successful.
And just putting the services pitch in there, we've done it. We've done it several times, so we have the experience. So if you're looking for somebody that has experience here, go with Progress Professional Services. It's what we do.
Yeah, and we actually have some case studies that we can share. Customers that have gone through this, have experienced it, like Constellation, Financing Systems, Locks and Pad. I think, Mike, you mentioned Technion earlier. So there are some instances you can see examples of what customers have gone through and what their results have been to date. So with that, I'd like to thank everyone for participating, and I'd like to encourage you to run a trial of OpenEdge 12.2. You can find that at progress.com/OpenEdge, and we look forward to our next Progress Talks. We thank you for joining us today.
Thanks, Tanya.
Thanks
guys.
Bye.
Bye.